Right. How useful is evidence that something does work for people with age-associated memory impairment?
There's some evidence for some substances.
Right.
It's, in my view, there's not very many things that have a good evidence base. There's a lot of studies that are being done or have been published. There's a lot of inconsistency in the literature as well, though. So, some of the studies you might be able to find, well, yes, there's a handful of studies that have been done on a particular substance or a particular herb, and they might all report an improvement in some type of cognitive function, but across the studies, you might not see a consistent improvement in which particular cognitive functions have changed. And to me, then that evidence is not all that convincing, because if there is a mechanistic explanation for an effect of a particular substance,
right,
then you would expect a degree of consistency. You would expect those particular cognitive functions to be improved in all of the studies that involve that particular substance. So when you look at the research literature and you see that it's not as consistent as you would expect, then it doesn't increase your confidence that those effects are genuine.
Right. I guess the problem is that people are so different, and when you study as you have to, and I think it's great that you do, but when you study substances and their effects on a large group of people, it's going to be hard to notice effects that would appear if that substance was perfect for a specific individual.
There's always individual variation. So yes, so when we run a study and we give, let's say 50 people a supplement, there's always a range of changes. So some people will show quite a big change at the end of the intervention, taking the substance for 6 weeks or whatever we're doing. Other people will show very little change. Some people will actually get worse.
Right.
And that's the nature of what's going on in the research, right, is that if you give a substance where there is no effect, some people will still perform better on the second time than they did in the first time, right? But that improvement can't be attributed to the substance.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what we're looking at all the time in the research, is that we know that we're working in an environment where some people are going to change due to other reasons, and their performance might go up. Some people's performance might go down for other reasons. And what we're trying to see within this larger group is a sort of signal that within the group as a whole, there is an added positive effect on top of this sort of noisy pattern of change across all these different individuals, right? That is suggesting a consistent effect of the substance. So if we have enough studies with enough people in them, then if a substance has a genuine effect, we should be able to see it fairly reliably. But still within that, that's going to be demonstrating that if you have enough people, enough of them will show an impact, a benefit from this substance, if it does have a benefit, for you to be able to detect. Right. So you should be able to see that, but you will always still then have individuals within that sample of people who will respond more than others. Right. And there does seem to be individual variation in the biochemistry that influences the extent to which people are affected by these things. The body's very complicated. The processes involved in ingesting these substances and them getting through the digestive system and broken down into metabolites, which it might not be the substance itself. It might be one of the metabolites that it's being broken down into that actually has an effect.
Mm.
And, that it's affected by, in some cases, the microbiota, the gut flora, the makeup of the type of bacteria that are in your gut can influence how much of this substance is going to get through into your bloodstream,
right,
or how much of it's being broken down before it gets in and what it's being broken down into. So you get individual variation for all of these sorts of things.
right.
But if there is an effect, of a substance, if we have studies with enough people, we should be able to see it consistently.
Right. I was talking to Emily Leproust from Twist Bioscience yesterday, which is a company working on genetic solutions, essentially. So they enable people to sequence their genomes, for example. Do you think that it is a promising field of personalizing medicine so that we can, based on the individual's biochemistry?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a promising field. I think the question is more about how far off is that promise.
Right.
We're learning more, and more genes are being identified. The role of particular genes, and which particular processes they might influence, and so on, are all being identified. But that, I think a lot of that is focused on diseases, understandably.
Right.
And so, most of the genes that are being identified that I'm aware of are more related to, processes that result in, an illness or something I would consider a disease or a fairly serious problem, as opposed to genes which result in variation that is still within what you might call the normal range.
Right.
That we all vary from each other in all sorts of different ways, and we can think about that as just normal variation. So that some people are better than others at different things. Some people's bodies process particular substances more efficiently than others. But as long as you are reasonably healthy and intact, we regard that as just normal variation. And that variation probably has a genetic basis. But those genes, I think, not so many of those are being identified yet as to, how they might interact or relate to cognitive functions or drug interactions and things like that, drug effects.
Right. I was speaking to Joe Cohen from Self Decode on another podcast a couple of weeks ago, and they are trying to deliver such a product where you can upload your single nucleotide polymorphisms. Are you familiar with that? Yeah. So essentially gene variants, and
yes,
and they are trying to help you based on your data.
I don't know this area particularly.
Right.
So, I couldn't say how many of those things have been mapped, I guess. My feeling is that there's a lot of work going on now, but I'm not sure of how long it's going to be before those things are really useful.
Right.
For most people, I don't know.